again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Lilia able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani. Around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Bring it, the fans want one. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Thursday night edition of the Forever Mighty podcast. I am here with Edward, and we are going to try something. I think we've talked about it a little bit before. We're going to try to let Eddie talk about prospects so he leaves the rest of us alone. How you doing, bud?
Not bad. I figured it'd be better to jump on a podcast than write an article every month. Be a bit more fun. We could break it down a little bit more, but and all these guys are still here because Jack Eichel is not an Anaheim Duck, so it didn't derail the show any bit. I figured we might have to hop on an emergency podcast tonight if Jack Eichel became a Duck, but I literally woke up to the news that he was traded to the Golden Knights this morning, like 5 minutes after I woke up. Yeah, or 5 minutes before I woke up, it got broke. So it was basically my alarm this morning, which was nice.
Damn, that's too funny. I think it's important that Canadians set their clocks to American hockey players moving around.
Yeah, I only wake up to trades, so.
Yeah, no, it was a trip to wake up, dude. Like, I woke up this morning at like 6 or whatever to walk the dog and stuff, and all of a sudden I'm looking down and I'm like, oh god, and like the takes have already started, and I'm just like, I can't. It's 6 o'clock. I don't want to do this right now.
It's just like one of those trades that, like, down the road you're gonna kind of, I don't know, like, not in a weird way, but you're gonna remember where you were, right? Like, I remember when, because of like how long the saga went on for. Like, I remember the Erik Karlsson trade, and I was in class when he got traded to the Sharks, and the same thing, immediately ripping the trade apart, because I think it was you who tweeted out earlier, or quote tweeted somebody, no matter what, the team trading the superstar away is always going to look like the loser until, 3 or 4 or 5 seasons down the road. I think if you look at that Karlsson trade now, I would argue the Sens potentially the winners of that trade, because they now have Norris and Tkachuk, and Erik Karlsson is no longer the same player that he was before. Right now you've got, and those are two of your top play, or 2/3 of your top line in Ottawa.
Didn't the San Jose pick get him Stutzla?
Did it? I don't.
I thought that was their.
Oh yeah, it did. Sorry, they chose to keep their 4th overall pick.
Yeah.
Instead
they
of
kept the Brady Tkachuk pick. That's right.
Yeah, and then I got them Tim Stutzla later. So arguably they're top players right now. So.
Yeah, I just think it's important that for this podcast that isn't about Jack Eichel, we spend another 20 minutes talking about Jack Eichel.
You gotta fill some time somewhere.
There's only like 3 or 4 people that I have ever heard of on this list. So I guess, so like I said at the beginning, you've talked about this and wanting to do something like this, and I know you've kicked around the idea of like doing an article and doing an accompanying podcast, or just doing an article, just doing a podcast, and we kind of settled on this for now, and we don't necessarily have a perfect format or a formula, but we're just going to kind of work our way through it and kind of see how it goes. But I think these are going to be very important for Anaheim this year, because what we're seeing, obviously, on the ice, as we've talked about, is the transition and watching the younger guys kind of take the next steps. But as we've talked about before, these young guys are going to be leading the team, but obviously teams aren't 4 guys. So there's going to need to be guys that come up through the ranks and make the team at an NHL level and develop into meaningful hockey players. And so this gives us kind of ideas to get familiar with some stuff and some of these players, some of whom are obviously closer to making the NHL than some of the others and stuff like that. But for now, I suppose we will start with everybody kind of that is closest, which both in proximity and timeline, I guess we'll start in San Diego. So I want to start with Braden Tracy. He's kind of been on my mind today, just thinking about that 2019 draft and, Kaliev and all that kind of stuff. And with Kaliev, I believe coming up to the Kings within the last week or so.
Yeah.
It's a good time to look at Braden Tracy. So how's Braden Tracy doing in San Diego?
I'm better than last year, which is not saying much because he had 0 points in 12 games last year. But he's got 3 assists in 5 games so far with the goals. And he's been kind of playing in this weird bottom 6 role with Bedini and Hunter Drew. The last 2 games, they've been as listed as the goals 4th line. I don't know if that's exactly how they've been utilized, but it's just a weird line to look at. Like Bedini is, kind of would likely be a career AHL guy, a nice 2-way forward.
He's a Sam Carrick, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not as physically tough, but like he's that kind of guy who's going to be up and down probably his whole career.
Yeah, he could make it just based off the fact that he kind of does everything okay. He's not exceptional at anything, but he's just a kind of well-rounded player, so he could be a guy that bounces around. And Hunter Drew's it's just hilarious seeing him on the right wing and from being a defenseman, and he's such a weird type of player, obviously like an enforcer, kind of, but he also has some offensive ability to him as well. And then you just stick Braden Tracy on that left wing, and I mean it's worked for him. And he's been one that I've been waiting to see some progression since the draft, because I haven't been as excited as I was about him, or the most excited I've been about him is at the draft when we got him, and looking into why he jumped into the first round and his progression in his rookie season, and kind of how that story came about, that his draft year ended up being his rookie season and not his second year in the league. And there's a lot of excitement around that pick, and a lot of people are saying that was a good pick for the Ducks at the time, and this could be one of the steals of the draft. And here we are a few years later, and it hasn't kind of materialized in that direction. And it's not that Tracy's been bad, it's that his seasons in the WHL after that, there wasn't a huge step forward, right? Like what you want to see from these kids in junior is, okay, he was around a point per game in his draft year, step that up to maybe keep the same production and work on some other areas of his game, but at least the point total stayed the same. But he regressed a bit and stayed a little bit under a point per game. That next year, where you're one of the older players in the league and you've got that experience, you're expected to dominate, especially as a former first-round pick. And he just didn't do that. He kind of languished around a point-per-game player and then struggled in the AHL. So it's been nice to see something from him this year. It's not amazing, but we need to see some progression from him this year, because he's always going to have that first-round pick tagline on him, and he's going to need to try and live up to those expectations.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting one, because that kind of draft was right around when I first kind of started paying a little bit more attention to the names on draft day that I didn't already know just from the media. So 4 or 5 guys, and I remember I think it was Pronman had him in his mid to late 50s, and Pronman's reaction the whole time was this just feels like an unnecessary reach. I get what they see as far as him being that kind of gritty, physical, potentially middle 6 kind of goal-scoring player, but I remember Pronman not being very high. And then, he was in the WHL, and he just kind of underwhelmed in that draft plus 1 year. See, I know things, lingo. Sorry, it's D plus 1 year. I remember he really did kind of disappoint. And so I think at this point, I think there's some benefit of him being a second first-round pick, and being second to Trevor Zegras, which kind of makes the rest of that draft gravy.
Yeah.
But I do think, for a lot of fans, that was really one of the first times where we did see Bob Murray make the kind of trades we want, right? Because that was the pick that came over in the Montour trade. So, yeah, I think for me, just if he can find that kind of 0.3, 0.4 point per game kind of pace at the AHL level, I think that would be encouraging, because there's, I think, a chance that his game translate better the higher up he goes, because the skill level of everybody is higher, as weird as that sounds. But he's definitely someone that I think at this point a lot of people have kind of started to, the guild is off the lily. Like you said, the most excited anybody was about him was the day he got picked.
Yeah, I think the one thing for Tracy is he's had to kind of develop his game in an interesting way that you normally don't see. So he went in what was supposed to be his rookie season, so his D-1 year. He did not play in the WHL. He went back down to I can't remember what the league is, but the league below that. So I guess they're kind of junior A league that he went down and went back to. So his draft year was actually his rookie season, which you don't see too often. And he played with 2 overage forwards on Moose Jaw's first line, and put up, I think it was 81 points or something across the entire season, and really had like a big second half push. And the fact that he didn't go to the World Juniors because he wasn't on Hockey Canada's radar at that point. Brett got it, the AJHL, I think is what he went back to. But he was on Hockey Canada's radar, played a full season, so benefited from that. And he's just, again, like one of those late risers up the draft chart where they kind of, those guys who were projected like Prodman had him late second, early third, and they sneak into, the first round based off that performance. Like Olin Zellweger kind of did that a bit last year, and even to some extent, not the same situation, but Mason Mctavish also did that, right? Where he wasn't projected to be a top 3 pick, but had a real good late push overseas, and then at the U18 tournament for Hockey Canada, he was one of the best players, so the Ducks took a swing on him. Zellweger, same thing, one of the better defensemen at that tournament. Ducks took a swing on him, and that's kind of what they did with Tracy, is just saying, okay, well, we've seen enough of this guy this year. The sample size across 2 seasons isn't really there, but we're going to take a swing and hope that he'll catch up eventually and show people that he is a first round pick. And I think it's hard to get over that, because you go into next season, those 2 guys move on, his line mates, because they're overagers, and now he's expected to be the guy, and doesn't really do well being the guy. And Moose Jaw eventually gets traded to Victoria, who are, I think, the worst offensive team in the league. And he was put on the first line, and they said, okay, you're going to do it for us. You're going to be that guy. You're going to drive play. You're going to generate offense for us. And he did okay, but again, he was around a point per game. He didn't – I just don't think he's that guy.
He didn't have that Sam Steele pop.
Yeah, I just don't think he's that type of player that can, even at the junior level, who can – win a game by himself and take over a game. He needs a supporting cast, and he can be a really, really good supporting player. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, look at some of the best supporting players of all time. Like a guy like Chris Kunitz, right? Like, he doesn't do it by himself, but you put him with an elite player, and his skill set just seems to mesh well with certain players. And I think he can be that guy, and I agree with you. I think that as he goes up higher in the levels, if you put him with the right guy, he'll look better and do better. And this season will be interesting to see how he handles being in kind of a lower role, a bottom 6 role, not as much responsibility, can kind of just get his confidence back and play his own way. And 3 assists in 5 games isn't amazing, but for a guy who failed to register a point in 12 games last year, it's development, it's progress. And at this point for Tracy, I'm not looking for him to wow me. I'm not looking for like Perrault type numbers from him. I'm just want to see progression. And it's early, but we've seen that. And if he can keep that up across the entire season and build on that next year, he's a guy that's going to be a bit of a project, but he has the skill set to make it eventually and be one of those middle 6 forwards for the Ducks down the road, or at least an option.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned about Mctavish. I think the name that I kind of popped into my head with the way you were talking about it was Jake Sanderson, right? Where everybody's like, oh, yeah, he's probably in like that 15 range. And you get a little bit closer and everybody's like, he might go closer to 10. His skating's real good. He's got good size. He's got, all that stuff you like NHL pedigree, like his dad played in the league and all that stuff. And then, you get closer and all of a sudden it's like, is Jake Sanderson going to go number 3 overall? It's like, whoa, wait, time out. How did we get here? And I think, Braden Tracy, to a far different extent, but a very similar concept, did that.
Yeah. You have these guys every year.
Rushing up the leaderboard. It's just natural. You're human, right? Your biases are going to kick in, and a lot of things that you just saw are going to weigh in on that. So like you said, he had a great push in that second half of that season, and there's a lot of reasons why those guys would be like, why didn't I get that guy, or something like that. So
he's got time, and I think a full season in San Diego after splitting time in the WHL and AHL last year, and kind of COVID really putting a wrench in a lot of people's plans. I think him knowing that even though he had another year of WHL eligibility, but the fact that there's that kind of new COVID rule in place that he can come over and play in the AHL this year, I think that's going to help him. I don't think he has much to gain to go back to the WHL and play for Victoria and try and be that guy again. I think he needs a different environment where he's not, tasked with being that, main offensive threat, and he can kind of just slowly develop other parts of his game, and then the offense will come eventually. And I think he just needs to get adjusted to the AHL level, and the same thing will happen, I think, when he eventually gets the call up to the NHL. This is going to take time, a few call ups, bouncing back and forth for a bit until it finally clicks. And we've seen that from a lot of guys, and we saw that from Sam Steele early. We saw that from Max Jones and Troy Terry. It's just going to be one of those guys that it takes a bit of time. He's not going to be, I don't want to say a regular first-round pick, but a guy who, the moment he gets called up, he's there, and he's staying for a while.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned this, and it ties in kind of perfectly. As far as guys being second first-round picks and making those kind of trades, another player that I think a lot of people are going to want to have their eye on, or already do have their eye on, I should say, is Jacob Perrault. Kind of the opposite of Tracy in that sense, right? He's like Braden Tracy's like a left winger, Jacob Perrault's a right winger. Jacob Perrault is much more of a traditional scoring threat as far as just having a really good shot, having good hands. He's shown some playmaking, I think. But he's a guy that I think a lot of people are hoping will turn into a top 6 scoring winger, right? He might not be a 30-40 goals, like a 30-40 goals guy, but he's going to be a guy who can contribute, which, as anybody who's watched Anaheim the last few years knows, those guys are more important than you think. Where is Perrault at right now?
Yeah, I mean, his start to the season has been exactly what you wanted. He's leading the goals and scoring with 2 goals, 4 assists in 5 games so far, which is exactly where you want him to be. At the end of the year, if he's up either leading the goals and scoring, or at least in that category, that's exactly the place you want him to be when we're talking about progression year on year, right? He comes from Sarnia, where he's clearly one of the best players in the league, one of the best goal scorers in the league. If he played a full season, probably would have put up 50 points, but that was the year that the OHL got cut short for the first time due to COVID, and comes into the AHL last year. He did pretty well, to be honest, for a guy we didn't expect to be there. Bounced up and down the lineup between the taxi squad, and it was kind of all over the place. A really tough year to get fully adjusted. So for him to take that big step this year, points-wise, has been great. But the big thing for me, and you'd mentioned it, like Perrault, the one thing and the key attribute you look at with him is his shot. And he's always been a guy that is a volume shooter, especially at the junior level. Just shoots the puck from anywhere at all times. Last year, he averaged 1.33 shots per game, which is nothing compared to what you expect from this guy. It's only, like I said, it's only 5 games so far, but he's averaging 4.2 shots per game so far this year. He leads the goals with 21 shots on goal, which is 10 more than the next highest guy, which is Vinny Lettieri with 11. Jeez. So you can tell.
And Vinny Lettieri's played half his game with the Ducks.
Yeah, exactly. And so Lettieri, if he played, I think he's played 2 or 3 games with the goals and 11 shots, so he'd be a bit closer to Perrault if he was there for the entire 5-game stretch or 6 games that the Gulls have played. But you can tell how the Gulls are utilizing him without even watching the games, just from that. Like, he is their main offensive weapon at this point, and he's their go-to guy. And that's what you want to see from Perrault this year, is to develop into that player. And he's such a tough guy to project, because I think he can be potentially a 30-goal scorer at the NHL level if he hits like the top end of his ceiling. And he's a very deceptive playmaker, and I don't think his skating is as bad as it was projected to be in the draft. The one thing I worried about was his work ethic, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was playing for a really bad Sarnia team, and despite almost leading the OHL in goals every season, they just were not a good team, and they didn't put a lot of pieces around him, and it was really tough to get motivated and come out every night, and Right. He got criticized heavily for that as a guy who just wasn't engaged, and I haven't seen that. I didn't see that last year in San Diego. I thought he was, that he put those concerns to bed, and definitely to the start this year, he's looked like a completely different player in that regards. So I think this is a guy, if you're going to watch a lot of goals games this year. Last year was, we're watching Zegras, we're watching Drysdale. Jacob Perrault is the guy you're watching this year. And the crazy thing about him too is it feels like we drafted him a while ago now, but he's not even 20 yet. He's gonna be 20 in April, so he's still 19 years old and leading the goals and scoring and starting out so well. So I want to see more goals. That's the big thing. 2 and 5 is great. He had 3 in 27 last year with 14 assists. Like I want to see the goals come at some point and him to really start putting the puck in the back of the net. But just the fact that he's shooting the puck a lot more this year, that's bound to come. A guy with this good of a not only a wrist shot but a one-timer and thready that he is on 5-on-5 and on the power play. He's a guy that's going to put up 20 to 30 goals in the AHL this year.
Yeah, I think it was kind of interesting, right? Because like you said, last year he was on the roster with Zegras and Drysdale, and then obviously when they got called up, he kind of became the guy in some ways. But also like he's kind of new there. He hasn't really established himself, and he didn't even have a chance really to be a big part of it because so much focus was on the lottery picks. And this year he comes into it. It's very clear right from the get, Zegras and Drysdale are going to be up in Anaheim and it's going to be his team. And I think he's kind of responded well from everything that you're saying and from everything that I've seen to having that kind of pressure put on his shoulders. And so I think, like you're saying, to see that change in his role within the team coincide with his shots, almost tripling, that's a really great, that's a really, actually literally tripling. That's just a really great sign for Anaheim. And like you said, I think, like we talked about with Zegras and to a lesser degree Comtois, the goals are going to come as long as the process kind of stays where it's at. And to see him really just pumping shots on net, at a certain point, they're just going to start going.
Yeah, and again, the one thing that always comes with prospects at any level is every year you're looking out for progression in some area. So you could say last year that jump from the OHL to the AHL, the shots weren't there, the goals weren't there, the points were decent. 17 points in 27 games in your debut AHL season is not bad for an 18-year-old / 19-year-old for most of the year. That's pretty good. And then this year, last year he focused on kind of the defensive side of the game, just getting adjusted to the pro level, right? And now taking that step forward to not just being kind of a passenger on the team and a middle six guy to being this team's top offensive weapon. And if he can keep that up for the entire season, I probably wouldn't have said this at the beginning of the year, but he's a guy that, with injuries later on in the year, could potentially get a call up and play a couple games.
So that's what I was going to ask you, right? If this season kind of goes the way a lot of us expect it to go, as far as, as the longer it goes on, the more I think more people expect the team to kind of tilt her off as far as their level of competitiveness every night. If we see a guy like Raquel moved out, or even, if they are able to move out Henrique or Silverberg, do you think Jacob Perrault right now is kind of right of first refusal for taking that spot on the big club?
Yeah, as long as he can continue this production, right? And it's all going to fall on his shoulders, is he will play his way into the lineup. A lot like we said with Zegras last year when he started in the AHL. It's up to him. He'll decide if he gets a shot or not based on his play and the numbers that he puts up at that level. If he's clearly the Ducks or the Gulls' best offensive player, and we come to trade deadline, we're 45, 50 games into the season. At that point, the Ducks kind of know who they are. If Raquel gets moved out the door, and even if it's just Raquel, but also maybe a Henrique or a Silverberg and a roster spot opens up, might not be immediate. Because we'll see some of the other guys slot in there, the Carricks and the Grants and Delores, the kind of the mainstays and the guys that have been sniffing around the lineup right now. Milano will stay up. But you could see potentially later on in the season, if more injuries happen or closer to the end of the year, that he might get rewarded with, 5, 6, 7 games to finish the year just to get a shot. And I think that would be great for him. Honestly, that is one of the best case scenarios you could see from him this year, is to do very well in the AHL, to earn himself a handful of games with the Ducks this year, and then push for a roster spot next year. And that is what you want to see from him. I mean, he could surprise us and make the Ducks, at the deadline or before that or after that, and stick around for 10, 15, 20 games. Who knows? But I think, top end, what you would hope to see from him is just to play well enough to get a handful of those games and take that experience and that confidence into next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the other thing, is if San Diego, is able to be competitive this year, and really make a push to the playoffs, I think you're absolutely right. I think if he's playing well, and I imagine if the goals are competitive, he's playing well. Like, those feel like kind of codependent facts in a certain way. I do think he's a guy that could get, like you said, 5, 6, 7, 8 games as a reward, but then also get sent back down like they did with Troy Terry. And I like the idea personally, but that I know that there is some disagreement about it. But I know for me, I'm a huge fan of what they did with Troy Terry and Sam Steele the year before that, and what they could do with Perrault, which is send him down and say, look, you got to come up and see what it's like, and we appreciate everything you're at, and we thought you deserved that, but now we need you to go show a little bit more of that leadership, a little bit more of that skill, and go down and try to lead this team, this AHL team, on a deep run in the playoffs. And I think there's a lot of value for players that you expect to be meaningful players going forward, getting that kind of leadership opportunity. And that, obviously, like, it's the AHL, so it's not the NHL talent level and stuff. But still, like, playing in games that matter, I think, has more value than playing, the 77th game of the season when it's really just, are the Ducks going to be 4th or 5th from the bottom kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it all depends, again, on his play and the Ducks' need for him at that point and what their plans for him are this year. I think for a lot of players on the Ducks roster, I kind of know, or at least project, what their plans are going to be for those guys this year, like Grew, based off his training camp, and it seems like he's a guy they want to keep around, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get sent back down eventually, but he's a guy that should play 30, 40 games this year for the Ducks. For Perrault, it's really hard to project what they want to do with him, because the Ducks don't have any shortage of wingers by any means that they can rotate in and out of the lineup. So there's no need to rush things along for him. But they've shown in the past, like, they're willing to reward guys that play well. Mm-hmm. And if he plays well enough and they just can't ignore what he's doing down there, he'll get a shot. And I'm excited to see him. I think his shot already is NHL quality. I think his skill set in terms of his deceptiveness and his playmaking ability, I think that's at NHL level already. Again, we'll see his skating, but I think at the very least he'll be an average skater in the NHL, and then you add that to a well above average shot and playmaking ability, that he'll be a valuable piece to this Ducks team. And the power play's been surprisingly good this year, and you think adding a future weapon to where Getzlaf is on that power play right now as a shooter, he is the guy that you want to put on that side when we think of right-handed one-time option in that left circle. It's never a bad thing to have a guy like Perrault who can shoot the puck and has proven already at the AHL level he can be that guy, and they're grooming him to be that guy. So I hope he gets a few games here. And the last couple of games he's played with Mctavish on the Gulls first line, which has been fun to see too, a future potential pairing between those two.
Yeah, and I just real quick, just to your point about the Ducks do have a history of rewarding guys. I mean, look, that's how Isaac Lundestrom hit everybody's radar so quickly, is he had a great rookie camp. That first year there was a rookie camp in Vegas, and he played his way into, I don't know, I think he got like 6 or 7 games that first year, playing on the wing. So, it's something that we know that the organization has a history of. And I not to make it about this again, but I do think after the Eichel trade today and some of the information that has started to come out, I do think it's fair to say that this organization is confident in the quality of players that they're drafting in the aggregate. And they don't seem to feel the need to rush that for much more certain things like a Jack Eichel. You mentioned Mctavish. We're going to get to him in a second, but I wanted to ask you about one of the most fun players last year. How is Lucas Dostal doing for San Diego right now?
Yeah, it's hard to judge his play this year because he's only played 2 games and the first game he allowed 6 goals, and the second game he only allowed 1, and actually played really well and stopped, I think, 24 of 25 shots against. Coming off an up-and-down season last year where he started just amazingly and then tailed off for an 8 to 9 game stretch and then finished the year strong. And he finished, I think, 15 and 916 save percentage, 2.87 goals against average. So pretty good year for a guy making his debut in North America. And we're all pretty familiar with what he did in Finland, and being the goaltender of the year there, and being one of the best players or one of the best goaltenders in probably top 5 league in the entire world. As a 19-year-old, 20-year-old in that league is impressive. So for him to come over and do what he did last year was amazing, and I expect him to do the same this year once he picks things up. It's always tough to start the way he did and allow 6 goals in your season opener, but for him to rebound the way he did in the second game, it shows you the confidence that he has in his ability. And he split starts with Eriksson Ek so far. He started 2, Eriksson Ek has started 3. So that seems to be what the goals or plan is for this year, until maybe one of them really takes the reins and runs with it, and then we might see a bit more of a discrepancy in maybe a 1A, 1B situation where one guy kind of takes the majority of the games and the other guy moves into a bit more of a backup role, which is what we saw with Dostal and Eriksson Ek last year, where Dostal was just playing so well at one point that he kind of pushed Eriksson Ek into that backup role, and Eriksson Ek also wasn't playing too great at the time. But yeah, I mean, I need to see more from Dostal, and it's tough with the goalies to kind of get them on the same level as the Perraults and Mctavishes, because they're only playing every other game at this point. But Dostal's a fun one, and he's a guy that has already been called up to back up Stolarz this year. Obviously didn't get into the game, but I think we'll see that a few times when the Ducks want to give John Gibson a rest. And I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year to potentially see him get at least 1 start. Don't know when that will be, probably later in the year. Might depend on his play with the goals. But I could see it, and I could see, even without a John Gibson injury or an Anthony Stolarz injury, just a night off for John Gibson and the Ducks just having confidence to throw Lukas Dostal out there for a start. I could see them wanting to get him into at least 1 game to see how he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the big benefits of having a team in San Diego, and I think that's one of the big things the Samuelis wanted to do by putting a team in San Diego, right? It's a lot easier now to get a guy up for a game. I think more than anything for emergency sakes, but more than that, I also think it provides them the opportunity to kind of reward guys and ride hot hands or things like that when someone's having a good run in San Diego. Lukas Dostal's so strange, right? Because there's like the classic saying, like, hockey is voodoo, and like to see what he did in a men's league, like a real pro league at such a young age, especially for that position, is pretty wild, and we've seen some of these goalie prospects over the last couple of years, Askarov, Knight,
Shesterkin,
Kosa, Shesterkin, right? We've seen some of these guys like go into these drafts like with some of this hype, and I don't feel like that was the case for Dostal. I feel like the hype came after the draft when he had that huge season, and I think that timing is right. And it's been really good to see that kind of pop. And Kat Silverman, she writes about goalies and things like that. I can't think of where she writes right now. I think she just moved around. But, she's someone that I think, is pretty knowledgeable and smart about goaltending. And she was really high on him, as someone who was kind of a disbeliever, just in how ridiculous those numbers are. Because you can have one great season, things can get a little weird like that. So I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, but I just think, with goalies and having him so young and having him be able to find his footing, right? Like, that's the real benefit of having a John Gibson. And to be honest, having Anthony Stolarz as a backup. Like, Stolarz has been good. He's a steady player. And that's the benefit of that, right? Is they don't feel like they have to rush him into that situation. like Ron Hextall was trying not to do with Carter Hart for all those years.
Yeah, they've been awarded the opportunity because of that to develop Lucas Dostal the right way, which is what you want for a young goaltender. They were able to leave him over in Europe and let him dominate for 2 or 3 years over there. Then they said, okay, you know what? Now we want you to come over here and prove yourself in North America. And he has a fairly good debut season, and then we'll see what he does this year. And like I said, maybe they'd say, okay, now we want you to get a couple games here or there, maybe groom you into the backup role next year, or a bit more of an active role across the entire season, and eventually just kind of working your way into potentially being John Gibson's successor, right? And it's a long-term plan. It takes a lot longer to develop goaltenders, or at least it should, than a regular player, forwards or defenseman. And I like the development path they've taken with him. I like that he's still splitting starts with Eric Sinek, and they're not saying, okay, you have to be the number one guy. They're saying if you want to be that guy, you've got to play your way into that role. And it's competition that breeds success. And for him to be up against a good goaltender like Ole Eriksson, who could be the goal starter, I think he's good enough to be that. That's only going to do wonders for him to have that competition and be riding that for the rest of the year. So I think that first game is an outlier. I think how he bounced back in that second start of the season is kind of indicative of how his season's going to go, and I fully expect him to be the goaltender we saw in the later half of the goal season last year, and especially in the playoffs where he was just unbelievable. Like he was, I think the first 3 playoff games for the Gulls, he's 40 save efforts in each of the 3 games that they played in. So that's the type of guy. He thrives like Gibson does on a lot of shots on goal. He's just one of those goaltenders who just loves to face a lot of shots. He's
chaotic, man.
Yeah.
He's just like when he's like his highlights from when he was over Sweden, I think you said it was.
Finland.
Is where he was Finland. He was just chaotic. Like it was awesome. It was so much fun because I'm pretty sure he's a smaller goaltender, which you don't get a lot of now. And given how much everything has improved, both technologically with the stick and just skill-wise for the players, to be a successful small goalie now is a lot harder. And to see him, playing well in a pro league is remarkable. And that's the thing I think that's kind of interesting, like you said, is Eric Zanek isn't a slouch. He was, when they drafted him, he was somebody that people were excited about. Like he wasn't necessarily someone where you're like, oh, he's gonna be the starter. But he was a guy that look, this is a guy played really well in Europe. They can bring him over, they can do it. And John Gibson's young, he's in the middle of his prime, they don't have to worry about it. And Eric Sinek is someone that could be on this team in the future. And he's kind of gotten passed by Dostal just based on hype, and most of it seems to be all of it seems to be largely really well deserved. And so I just think Anaheim's actually in kind of a good spot. There's another guy we'll get to later that they just took in the draft, and they seem to have a decent amount of goaltending depth in the system right now. Yeah,
they've done a good job kind of filling the pipeline after obviously the days of Hiller and Gibby and Freddy. They've done pretty good in terms of drafting their talent. We talked about Ole Eriksson and Lucas Dostal, and Roman Durney is still there. And then, a guy you mentioned briefly that they drafted last year, Gage Alexander, is another goaltender in the pipeline from them who's started really well this year too. And we'll get to that at some point here. But yeah, they've done a good job kind of stocking that side of their prospect pool, which you need to, right? John Gibson is 27 now, and who knows how much longer he is going to be with the team. So you need to have a plan in place to replace him. Look at some of the teams that didn't have plans in place and how they've struggled to find, Carolina up until this year, and they had to go through the draft through free agency, right, to get Freddy Anderson.
Sure this year?
Yeah, you can't argue. He's 8-0, so you can't argue that.
Yeah, we've never seen Freddy Anderson play well early in the regular season.
It helps playing for a very good defensive team, though.
Or a really good offensive team.
Yeah, they're both.
Weird how he's had 3 different stops, and in the regular season he seems to be really good. Anyways, I don't want to talk shit about Freddy right now. But like you said, I think it's important to note, right? We've seen teams that didn't have that organizational depth and didn't feel like they were in a position to be set from internally from goaltending, right? You think of Florida, where they had Spencer Knight, but I think they drafted him the same year they gave Bobrovsky $10 million. And like all of a sudden, Bobrovsky falls off a cliff, but he's making an insane amount of money. And then you've also got Spencer Knight, who like looks like he could be the real deal. And now you find yourself in this weird position. Or you find yourself in a position similar to what the Kings were in the 2000s and the Ducks were in the middle of the 2010s, is you can't find a goalie to save your life. For the Kings, it was looking for a starter until John Quick came along. But for Anaheim, like they had Fast and they had Delorier and all these guys. They were just trying to find a steady backup to put behind Freddie without having to rush Gibby. And I mean, you can look at it right now. The organization has that, right? You've got Gibby, who's your starter. You've got Solars, who's a good backup. And then you've got 2 or 3 guys, maybe even 4, as you mentioned, 4 guys in the pipeline that could develop into NHL quality goaltenders. And so I do think, they're in a much better position now than maybe they've been in the past. As much shit as I'm going to talk about him, Eddy and Gibby played really well for Anaheim, and there's always going to be ebbs and flows in the position. And so to have Gibby up now and clearly, like an everyday NHL player, like whatever, but to then have that behind them now and not feel like they're kind of scrambling, I think is really good.
Yeah, I want to
goalies right now.
Move to Mason McTavish here if we to kind of round off the goals a little bit.
Or Jason, he's not here to defend his goalies. So Mason McTavish, good. He got hurt and he is down in San Diego on a conditioning stint. We will go live to Eddy to tell us more about this.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how much time is left on that conditioning stint, because the goals don't play until I think tomorrow or Saturday, and I'm not sure if he's eligible to play in those games. I think it was a 2-week conditioning stint, so maybe he has a couple.
I think it's like 2 weeks games or something like that. They don't get very much time.
Yeah, so I remember Comtois did the same thing before they ultimately sent him back to the QMJHL a few years ago. So McTavish kind of in a fairly similar spot here, except he has 1 goal, 1 assist in 3 games with the Ducks, and he has a goal and an assist in 2 games with the Gulls, and his goal was just a beautiful snipe top corner on the power play. And they immediately threw him right into a first-line center role with San Diego, which is interesting, right? Because there's a bit of a shift from the way they approach Zegras. I know it's a different situation, but Zegras played on the wing until they said, okay, now you're going to play center, and we'll send you back down to play center. With McTavish, they're like, nope, you're playing with the wing with the Ducks, but we're going to play at center, with the Gulls. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that Carrick was up with the team and Grew's up with the team, and they don't have a ton of center depth now in San Diego. But it was nice to see, and for him to start the way he did and do well on that conditioning stint, gives us some hope and gives him some leverage that he might be a backup with the Ducks, right? And play out at least the last little handful, 5 or 6 games he has before they have to make that decision whether they're going to keep him around or send him back down to Peterborough in the OHL. But I think he's a guy who could stick around, and I hope he does. A lot of it will depend on his, production, if he does get the call up back to Anaheim and how he does over that stretch. But, it'll be interesting to see if he checks in tomorrow and what that looks like, because I believe Sam Carrick and Vinny Lettieri, I think, were sent down and then called back up as kind of paper transactions over the last couple days. Some people speculated that potentially them getting sent down meant that Silfverberg Silfverberg and McTavish would be back in the lineup. So, I hope we see him, and I hope he gets a few more games with the Ducks, because I fully expected to be talking about him in Peterborough this year and how he's doing in the OHL, and the fact that he surprised everybody and made the team, and not only made the team, did well and made an impact in his few games with Anaheim, and has now made an impact at the AHL level. All that does is prove to the team that he can stick around and compete at this level. And as the broadcast always likes to mention, he's 6'2", 205 or whatever, 215. So he definitely has a size to stick around, and he's a bit of a different mold than a lot of the prospects that we've brought into the system over the last couple of years, where he comes in right off the draft year, already physically ready to compete at the NHL level, and it seems like the rest of his skill set has already kind of caught up to that, and he's proving that he can compete at the NHL level at just 18 years old.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, like his size and is so interesting, right? Because I think like part of playing him at wing in the NHL was, one, that's where the openings were, right? They weren't being centers they had in the lineup. Henrique isn't playing center right now. And McTavish was able to provide energy and that shot in a way that not a lot of guys, in the line really do. And I think it shows, I don't want to make it a negative. There are still some of those old school like thought processes for the Ducks as an organization, right? Because like you said, even when he was in the AHL, Zegras was put on the wing initially, just being like, oh, he's our beautiful little but like McTavish was playing against men in the overseas because of COVID last year, or and then he came up and he held his own, so they're like, yeah, he's going to be a center. And so I do think it's really hit him, because get crazy and overreact. It really is like he looks so good on the wing and just really just running around like a wrecking ball out there that like I wonder on what kind of a player is available to them in the draft. Not saying anybody in particular, even though that's obvious. If he is someone that they could, move to the wing to really double up on that, really, use him as kind of like a force multiplier with whoever that could be that they draft at the top next year. A guy like Zegras, lightning and thunder kind of differential in style, and both of them being able to play together, I think would be huge.
McTavish's development and progress, and obviously Zegras excelling as a center, and Lindstrom taking a step forward this year, and Benoit Olivier-Giroux making the lineup. I mean, it shouldn't necessarily impact your decision at the draft. You should always take the best player available. And if you do win the lottery and you get first overall, there's no question you're taking Shane Wright, no matter how many centers you have in your organization. But outside of that, it does present an interesting case for the Ducks that, if you're deciding between a Brad Lambert or Joakim Kemmel or one of the wingers or the defensemen, right? Like, you could, if you have them all kind of ranked fairly close to each other, you could then say, well, look at all the centers we have. We have, projected first line, second line, third line center for the future, and they've all been playing well and they fit into our system. Maybe, we can add to our defense depth and draft a future partner for Jamie Drysdale, or maybe we draft another right-handed defenseman for some support there, or another kind of winger or sniper like Kemmel or somebody like that,
right,
to bring into the team and kind of fill out the rest of the holes on this roster. So you do have some flexibility there if McTavish can stick around for the rest of the year and eventually shift to center and show that he can be that guy. But the big thing for the Ducks going forward too, and with McTavish and even with Zegras and Perrault, who's played center in the past, and wing, and Lindstrom, who can play in the wing and center, is this like potential flexibility to move guys around, and guys that have played in multiple positions. That's valuable going forward, right? And I know it's it's not difficult to move a right winger to a left wing and kind of move guys around, but to have that already kind of built in, that okay, McTavish, you can play on the left wing, you can play at center, and we can move you around, and we can bring a guy up, and we can fit other guys into the lineup. We don't have to worry about saying, okay, this guy has to play center. Like, he can only play center. I like that there is some flexibility there, that you can move some guys around, and if you do want to go and get another center, you can move McTavish to the wing, and potentially in the future, maybe you move Zegras to the wing, right? It doesn't mean he has to be your first line center moving forward. I think we would all like him to be, but there is some flexibility there that if you do bring in guys like a Shane Wright, who you know is going to be a center at the NHL level, that you can move these guys to the wing and you're not losing out on their development or their progress.
Yeah, I mean, this is cart 50 feet in front of the horse, but I think the best example of what this run seen from Tampa Bay, I mean, Point, Cirelli, Palat, Johnson, Killorn, Gord, just got forwards. NHL quality forwards. And that's just valuable. Like you had that kind of flexibility or lineup flexibility is huge, and it allows you to, kind of Mr. Potato Head your way through the season and make the most in any context that you're on. So I just think it's a really interesting thing. And like you said, the next two drafts are full of guys that project to be, top line, top six NHL centers. So having some of that flexibility with Zegras or having some of that flexibility with Mctavish is really valuable and allows to move forward with, I think, a little added patience and a little added optimism.
Yeah, I think it gives you that flexibility, like we said, and allows you to kind of make a decision later on where you want to play these guys. Like we saw with Zegras, and they're shifting from the wing to center, and what we project is probably the same for Mason Mctavish, right? But it gives you that kind of flexibility moving forward, that these guys have played at different positions in your lineup, and they've worked out, and you can kind of mold the lineup in the way that you want it to look going forward, and you don't have to have like a Ryan Getzlaf that has to play center. Nothing against Getzlaf, I mean, but you know what I mean. Like there is
he played fourth line last year. Don't diminish.
Occasionally he'll play on right, but the same steel too. Center until a few games ago, and they played him on the wing, and we've seen Comtois play on both sides, left and right. So there is some flexibility to move guys into different sides of the ice. And kind of shift up and mix up the lines a little bit. So that it's nice to have a little bit of freedom to do that.
Yeah. It's the team, like, have Cogliano, who came up as a center, take every face-off on like one side of the ice before. Like, it provides you those little options and those little. We're going to move out of San Diego for now. And I imagine the player everybody wants out right now is Sasha the Pasta Pat, who I think is the best hockey player in the world right now, currently in.
Yeah, I mean it certainly looks like that. Sasha Pastuov, leading the OHL in scoring with 10 goals and 9 assists in 11 games, 19 points. And second in goal scoring, 10 is second only. I forget who it is. Somebody has 11. But it's been such an interesting start and shift for Pastuov, where when he was drafted, we all thought he was going to go the NCAA route and play for Notre Dame. And then all of a sudden, I think it was in the spring or early summer, the news comes out that he's decided to forego his commitment to Notre Dame and choose to play in the OHL, which you don't see too often, but we've seen it from some American players in the past. Max Jones made the shift from the USNTDP and went to play for London in the OHL, and Matthew Tkachuk did the same thing and went to play for London. So it happens occasionally, but for Pastuov to go to a team that's mediocre, the Guelph Storm aren't a powerhouse in the OHL, to slot in immediately top line, top power play, and lead the league in scoring through 11 games. And not only do that, but 2 hat tricks in those 11 games, and to play with a draft eligible rookie center and put up those numbers as well and be the play driving force on that team. It's been the best start possible you could hope for Sasa Pastuov, and it's redemption for him, right? He fell down to the 3rd round where the Ducks grabbed him, And everybody's talking about, oh man, his skating is the reason he fell. But everything else is great. His shot is amazing. His playmaking ability, his deception, his creativity, it's all amazing. But the book on him was that his skating was just so bad that he would never make it to the NHL, apparently. And he's proven doubters wrong, which is great. And again, not even just leading the league in points and in goal scoring, but also leading all fourths in shots with 49 and one back from the league lead. Jack Thompson, the defenseman for Sudbury, who's a Lightning prospect, has 50. But to be basically leading the league in almost all offensive categories is the best possible outcome you could have hoped for Sasa Pastujov, and it's great to see. And for a guy that was a third-round pick, you look at that draft now, potentially coming out of it, it's Mctavish, Zellweger, and Pastujov with your first 3 picks. It's going to be a draft you look back on in 5-6 years for the Ducks and say, this was the big one that got them from a good prospect pool and a team that can be contending in 3 to 4 years to, you know, a great prospect pool and have a really well-rounded, you know, depth of talented players.
You know, there's players every year, right, that go later than would suggest they should have gone. And, you know, for fans, those are always the ones torture yourself. So-and-so went in the whatever round and want to put necessarily that pressure on Pastujov already, right? Like, he hasn't played an NHL game. He does have questions about skating. And as of now, his skill set is so high that he's able to issues with his skating. And, you know, as we know from an Eric Stevens article, like, they sent him to Guelph to work with there to work on his skating, and he's still in the process of improving. We're seeing him be this effective as he gets older, as his experience increases, as he gets physically more developed player. If his skating can just keep pace and he can just be good enough, there's a lot of things about his game, you know. And is such a wonderful split, right? It reminds you of the year that I think Raquel put up like 35 goals and 34 assists. Like, it's just that perfect symmetric. And so he does have a chance to be the guy that, you know, you look back on in years and go, how did that guy go that late? Like, it doesn't make sense. And everything we're seeing right now seems to suggest that.
So I'm just trying to fix the
You're
audio
good.
here. We'll stitch this in for the audio version of the podcast, but want to make sure everybody listening live here is still having a good experience. Trying to figure out what's causing the issue, because the stream is saying it's running properly.
It's my fault. Everybody in the Discord said it's my fault. It's probably right.
If we end up having to end it and then restart it, we'll do that. But we'll move on and continue with it anyway. But back to Pastujov. Yeah, it's just, you know, coming off a year where the numbers he put up were first round talent, and you look at kind of all the kind of prospect gurus out there and you know, the analytics guys when it comes to prospects, everybody had Pastujov ranked as a top 10, top 15 talent in the draft. And, you know, he put up 30 goals, 35 assists in 41 games with the USN TDP's under 18 team, led the team in scoring by a landslide, like 20 points, was by far their best player offensively. You know, just highlight reel plays, everything you expect and you look for in a top talent. And the skating just became such an issue for so many people, despite the numbers. And I rarely ever see that. Like, you know, again, Perrault had questions about his skating, not to the same extent, but still was a first round pick. And from what I saw from Sasha Pastujov, like, his skating isn't amazing. It was, you know, it looked NHL average or maybe slightly below average, but there was nothing really wrong with it where, and I'm no expert by any means, but that I was like, oh man, this kid's never going to make it. But it's one of those storylines, right, on draft day where it gets in the GM's heads and it gets in the scouting department's heads, and they say, okay, you know, if somebody's saying this, then it must be true. And a guy continues to fall. And once he falls a little bit, they tend to landslide from there and continue to fall. And it was nice for once, because we've seen guys like that every year that's falling and falling and falling. Kaliev was one. Before, the year before that, Keel Thomas was another. And we're like, oh man, I hope the Ducks draft these guys. And for those two players that I just mentioned, they went to the Kings a couple picks before the Ducks ended up getting them. And it always seems like the Ducks don't end up getting these guys. And for them to land Pastujov in the draft was great. Everybody loved the pick at that point. And at the time was slated as the steal of the draft, and I think you could still say that based off the way he started this year, and will likely to continue to do so, because he's in a position to, as a first line talent on that team, as a top power play guy, play driving winger, that this isn't an anomaly for him this year. Like, he is going to be one of, if not the best offensive player in that league across the entire season. And there's some fairly talented players in the OHL this year. One who is going to likely go first overall in the draft in Shane Wright. And that's not to say he's better than Shane Wright, because Shane Wright's a full 2 or 3 years younger than him. But it's some good company to keep, especially, coming into a new league, a new country for him, and excelling and gelling that quickly with some new line mates and new teammates. It's great. I love to see it, because the Ducks need players like this. Creative, talented, goal-scoring wingers that can fill out the top six of this team. You've got Zegras, who's going to be the number one center for this team, and is one of already, if not, he will definitely be one of the most creative players in the league in the future. To add a player like Perrault and his shooting ability, and a complement of a guy like Sasa Pastujov to that top six, and you start to see the roster take shape and where these guys are going to fit. And I love to see it. I can't complain. I mean, for me, it's redemption for Pastujov for falling to the third round. That you think, you look at this draft a few years from now, and he's going to be one of those guys like the Braden Point, right? You look at it and say, how did this guy go this far?
Trying to saying I felt bad.
Yeah, he's going to be that guy, and he already is. But when he makes it to the NHL and starts to do this at the pro level, a lot of people are going to look back and say, how did this guy fall to the third round? He's going to be that player. I have, of all the prospects that the Ducks have right now, he is probably the one I'm the most excited about.
Yeah, interesting. So, let's see here real quick. Well, I guess if we want to just go to Sasha Pastujov, who is a poor skating forward, we should go with the hell on wheels, incredible skating defenseman in Olin Zellweger. I don't know. I think Eddie died, guys.
No, I was trying to fix the internet to see what the issue was. But, yeah. we'll fix this all after. Apologies, guys. But, yeah, with Olin Zellweger, I think we talked about it when we were talking about Braden Tracy earlier this year, is late risers in the draft who kind of make a late season push and end up going a lot higher than they expected. And Olin Zellweger was that guy where there was some people projecting him to be a late first round pick, and obviously he goes early second to the Ducks, and a lot of that was because the delayed start to the OHL season, and he put up 13 points in 11 games coming off a rookie year where he only had 12 points in 58 games. So some significant increase in his production there, and obviously his role increased in that season as well. And then not only that, to go to the U18 tournament for Canada and be one of their top point-producing defensemen, the writing was on the wall. Like, you could see his skating on display already, but then when the points start coming and he looks a bit more confident, is playing first power play for both Everett and for Canada at that tournament, somebody was going to take him and make a reach. And the Ducks we're lucky that the Ducks were that team, because he's another guy, again, like Pastujov, that people were projecting to be a first round talent and a steal in the draft. And not only that, he was one of, or I think the youngest player available of any prospect in that draft. And the Ducks they've liked those players in the past, and Braden Tracy was kind of that as well. But man, like the one concern I had with Zellweger is the small sample size in a tournament. Is your reasoning for drafting him, and this year is going to be such a big year for him to prove that point per game pace in the WHL was not a fluke. And he's got off to a good start so far. He's got 7 points, 2 goals, 5 assists in 6 games played. It's still, again, a small sample size, but to already get off to that mark and show that you can be a point per game player at the junior level as a defenseman, he's taken all the right steps to prove that it wasn't a fluke, and that the Ducks were right for taking him where they did. And you think of the modern day NHL defenseman and how valuable skating is. It doesn't matter that he's 5'11". The same with Jamie Drysdale. It doesn't matter that he's 5'11", 6 feet tall. It's the fact that their skating is so exceptional that it doesn't matter. Like, these guys are dominant players. Look at Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar and Adam Fox to some extent. I know he's a little bit bigger, but still, like, these are the modern day NHL defensemen. And to have Zellweger, who is likely the best skater in that draft, and Drysdale, who was arguably the best skater in his draft class as well, on the back end, it gives you hope for the future. And to have these really fast, mobile, puck moving defensemen who can get the puck up to Zegras and Pastral from Perrault. It's a good sign for the future, and a bit of a shift from the defensemen the Ducks have traditionally drafted in the past.
I don't know. Unnecessary shot at all of my beautiful big boys who can't skate. But no, you're 100% right, man. I think the thing for me, right, is it almost felt like on Poirier in the, Jeremy Poirier was someone who I was really excited about, and there's 100 red flags with him as far as some character stuff. I don't want to say character stuff, but like work ethic stuff. But similar to like what you said with Perrault, like he was playing on a dog shit team, and so it can be hard to muster up the energy to do that every night. But he's that incredibly quick, incredibly dynamic, like actual definition of dynamic defensive player. And to see, like you said, Anaheim transition away from putting in front of their own net kind of guys to more, right? Because even like a Larson type is there's something safe about that pick in how simple his game is, right? Whether the guy makes it or not is one thing, but like you're not going to have issues about like how he plays the game. Where as a guy with Zellweger, especially for, like we've talked about, a more traditionally minded organization philosophically, like taking a guy at his size and his age with his particular skill set and style of play, like I do think it shows a little bit of growth. It shows a little bit of awareness and what is kind of lacking in the pipeline. Go. Sorry.
No, I think the big thing for me with Zellweger is, we know he's a great skater, just deceptive with the puck, can make the first pass. That's all stuff that's going to translate fairly well to the NHL level. There doesn't need to be a lot of work there for him to really work on that side of his skill set. It was the offensive side of the game that really needed to not only develop but show some consistency and prove again that last year's small sample size wasn't a fluke. And I think with that speed, as long as you can have a good first pass and be such a smart player like he is, his hockey sense is through the roof. The offense is going to come at every level, and that kind of is what makes me so optimistic with Olin Zellweger. Is he's so quick, he's so smart that the points that he puts up are effortless, right? He's not flashy. He's not an Erik Karlsson in the sense where he's just making ridiculous plays. He's just making smart plays at high rate of speed, and because of that, he's creating not only opportunities for himself but creating space for his teammates, and that is so dangerous to have a blue liner like that who can make a rush up the ice, pull players out of position and then open up space potentially, again, for guys like Trevor Zegras and Comtois and Raquel and Pastuov and whoever's in the lineup at that point, and then to couple that with another player who can do exactly the same thing in Jamie Drysdale is huge. And
let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're gonna give me a heart attack if you talk about playing those two guys together at the same time. I'm gonna have a heart
it might not be the recipe for success, but to have both of them in the lineup and be able to roll, even if they're not playing together, to roll one out and have kind of two guys on different pairings that can do that is great. And I think for Zellweger, the fact again that he leads the WHL defenseman in points per game with 1.17, that's a testament to how much his offense has developed this year. He's playing second pairing with Dylan Anderson. Sometimes they've kind of been the first pairing forever this year, but he's kind of been put into a leadership role with the team this year as well. So he'll develop that side of his game with the team this year too. And he's a bit more of a project again because the size is always going to be a little bit of an issue, and maybe not his height because he's 5'10", 5'11", but he's really kind of slight kid.
He's a skinny kid.
Yeah, where Jamie Drysdale is small, but he's a bit of a bigger, stockier type kid in terms of his build, and Zellweger's smaller.
First time anybody has ever called Drysdale stocky. Watch.
Yeah. Well, if you put him side by side with Zellweger,
right.
and
he's just built different than Zellweger. Zellweger's a beanpole, man.
It will take some time.
Right.
But I mean, if Elias Pettersson can make the NHL the way he looked out of the draft and still does, then everybody has hope. So.
Yeah. No, but I think you're absolutely right, and I think kind of how he's playing right now. I think you said it's Everett is that second pair guy. Like I think that's huge, right? If he can be that kind of third defenseman and fourth defenseman and really provide that kind of offensive dynamism and depth to a blue line, that's going to be huge because, like you said, the way the game works now. I mean, look, Sam Girard and Cale Makar don't play on the same line for a reason. I mean, part of that is that they have Devin Taves, who's really good, but the other part of that is like you need those guys out there as often as possible who can get the puck up ice, who can skate with it, who can make plays, who can make that big first pass. And again, to like see them go with someone who maybe there's a little bit of organizational familiarity because one of the coaches, I think it was Jeff Ward, who worked with him for the juniors, still like to see them take that into consideration and go with this type of player, I think is really huge. And I think it's very exciting for Ducks fans as far as organizational. But this is going to be a 5-hour podcast if I don't move this along.
I do want to say one thing on the Zellweger point. I think the comparison with Gerard Makar and the way they're utilized in Colorado, I think is a perfect example of how the Ducks could potentially utilize Zellweger, Drysdale in the future and playing them on different pairings. And I mean, they also have the advantage of having Bowen Byram too, which is an embarrassment of riches to have those three fast skating defensemen on their blue line. But yeah, I think Zellweger looks a lot like Sam Girard did when Sam Girard was in junior, and obviously Drysdale has some comparable attributes to what Cale Makar brings.
Don't do that to that kid. Cale Makar might already be the best defenseman in the league. Don't do that to that kid. No, but I understand what you're saying, and you're 100% right. Like you can see the way that this functions at an NHL level. Like there's already the proof of concept in the NHL. The question will be, can these guys develop in that way? And Drysdale looks like he's well on his way, and based on some of what we're seeing from Zellweger, and given how much room he has to grow just based on his age, there's every reason to think that there's a lot of potential and promise there for Anaheim's blue line to go with the amount of forward talent they have.
Yeah, you're right here, but let's rapid fire through some of these guys here. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. So.
Yeah. So okay, Tyson Hines. It says here in your notes, a big-bodied mobile defenseman. Sounds like someone who is after my heart.
Yeah. Bit of a reach. I think they got him in the third round, and not many people had him ranked that high. But he just has a projectable skill set and frame where he looks like he could easily be an NHL defenseman. He's 6'3", I think 190 right now. Pretty decent speed, around NHL average, maybe slightly above. And just kind of an ever-developing offensive game. He's not a Zellweger, he's not a Drysdale. He's not going to wow you with, flashy skating or offensive ability or deceptiveness. He just makes smart plays. He's a big, smart, mobile defenseman. And one of those guys you like to have in your system, right, is, you got to round it out a little bit. We'll get to Henry Thrawn at the same point, but fairly similar to what Thrawn has in terms of build and defensive acumen, just maybe without the offensive ability that Thrawn brings to the game. And he's had a pretty solid start with Rimouski. He's got a goal and 4 assists in 8 games. He had 15 points in 23 games with Rimouski after getting traded from Shawinigan at the deadline last year. So he's just kind of a nice little project for the Ducks, right? You've got the big name guys, the Thrawn, Zellweger, Drysdale, Lacombe even, that are going to take some of the headlines and be the guys you project to be impact defensemen down the road. But Hines projects as potentially a nice solid 5 or 6 NHL defenseman who can be a really good defensive option that you can throw over the boards, bring some size, some mobility, and just a really good shutdown defenseman who can contribute offensively every now and then. So I like what he brings, and I like how he kind of rounds out and provides a bit of a different style than the rest of the defensemen the Ducks have in their pipeline.
Yeah, just scanning his elite prospects page, the thing that stands out for me here is he plays physical and is constantly looking to deny plays and separate attackers from pucks along the wall. That's what you need, right? Like, I mentioned this, I think, a show or two ago, that like Anaheim, like, you don't ever want to turn away from skill set, but Anaheim does need to start looking organizationally to start adding those more defensive guys, those, maybe a little bit bigger bodied or even just physical, right? Because Ryan Ellis, I don't think anybody thinks is a giant, but Ryan Ellis is able to play a very physical game, a very defensive game, and really be a very steadying presence now in Philly, but before in Nashville, and, all that kind of stuff. So, I just think you're 100% right. Like, having those kind of guys to provide that variety as organizational depth is important. The next year is someone I tried to talk about earlier, but you hate them, and so you don't want to talk about them, and that is Alexander the Gage Alexander of the Winnipeg Ice. Great name, by the way. In, I think, the Western Hockey League. I don't know.
Yep.
It says here CHL, but that's not a real thing.
Yeah. Gage Alexander plays for the Winnipeg Ice in the WHL. They're one of the best teams, or they are actually the top-ranked team in the CHL. So the CHL, it's weird. The CHL puts out their rankings, their top 10, and they include like all 3 leagues, so the QMJHL, OHL, and WHL in those rankings. So the Winnipeg Ice are ranked number 1 right now for good reason. They've only lost 1 game this year. I think they're 12-1. And Alexander is splitting starts with Daniel Hauser. Alexander's played 6 games, is 5-1-0 with a 1.67 goals against average and a 9.27 save percentage. Hauser's 7-0 with fairly similar numbers as well. And it was the same for both of them last year. They split starts, and Alexander played 9 games with similar numbers, and Hauser played 10. In a small sample size for Winnipeg last year. But the big thing for me is, again, we talk about having different types of players and rounding out the prospect pool. Gage Alexander is 6'6". Like, he is a completely different type of goaltender than the Ducks have really ever had in their system, or at least to what they have now, where you look at Dossel's a bit smaller. Eriksson Ek's a bit of a bigger guy, but again, like, there's something to be said about having like a 6'6" goaltender and the way they play, and it's more of a stand-up style compared to the chaos that Dostal likes to play at and command, and to have that variety in your system, and for him to be a top goaltender on a very good team and to have some good numbers and play well this year. It's nice to see for the Ducks to have this kind of plan in place behind John Gibson and some structure there and some different options and variety of guys that could kind of move into this lineup. And Gage Alexander wasn't a flashy pick by any means, but you could see why the Ducks took him to provide a bit of a different feel to their goaltending depth in their prospect pool.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, with him playing in the WHL. Like, he feels to me, and I don't mean this disrespectfully. It's more of just to be appropriate of Costa's skill level. But like, he does feel like a tier 2 kind of Sebastian Costa style, where he's a big guy. He's putting up really good numbers in the WHL, which I think, and you'll be able to correct me if this is wrong, I think the WHL is a little bit more offensive minded than the other two. That might just be complete bullshit, but still like you said, he's 6'6" guy. He's a big body. He's going to play just a very different style. His numbers already show that he's able to be competitive, if not semi-dominant, relative to his peers. And, like you said, kind of having all three sizes of goalies in the pipeline, I think is really huge. Is there anything else you want to say about Alexander the Gauge?
No, I would say, the one thing to keep in mind with him is, the numbers are great, the record is great, but that team is just almost on a whole nother level. Again, they're the top-ranked team in the CHL,
right?
And that's the one thing I always, especially for goaltenders, like for forwards, yeah, if they're on a very good team, again, a lot of that has to do with the offensive threat and the forward talent they have on the roster. Sometimes, and that's not to say it's the case here, the goaltenders almost just coast along with a great team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, Carter Hart and Daniel Wolf, both with Everett, Carter Hart got a lot of hype for a good reason. He's a great goaltender, and he's already proven to be an NHL starter. But that Everett team was amazing, and they were just so well drilled defensively, and they were just stomping on everybody in that league, and that took his stock to another level. And I think, just be wary of that with Gage Alexander here, that this is an exceptional team, and his numbers are going to look really good because of that. So don't overhype him just yet. We gotta see that progression when he gets to the pro level and how he kind of jumps up to the next level from there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think he provides, like you said, like we've said, organizational depth, and I don't want to belabor the point.
I can't wait to see you pronounce this guy's next name.
I have been waiting all episode to do this. So I would now like Shaboy Eddy to talk about Sean Shagirl.
Nailed it. I love it.
God, look, folks, I'm a professional. I'm not, but it's fine. Eddy, Sean Shagirl, what's up with the guy?
Yeah, I really like this pick from the Ducks in the last draft. I think he was a 5th-round pick from the Ducks. I'd have to double-check that. Mm-hmm. But he was fairly similar to Braden Tracy in terms of what he brings to the game. Like when Tracy was in his draft year, a lot of people were saying he was like a Swiss Army knife type player, really good goal scorer. Playmaking ability is pretty good as well. Defensively, he's not a liability. He kind of just does everything. And I think Sean Shagirl takes that to another level in the sense that he does everything good. He just doesn't have, that identifiable skill. He's not a dynamic offensive player. He's not, a Benoit Olivier Groulx type player where defensively he's just, shut down player and that's his kind of identifiable skill. He's just pretty good at everything. And he's done that so far to start the year. He's on the top line for the Calgary Hitmen. Shout out Ryan Getzlaff's junior team back in the day.
Numbers in the rafters, baby.
Yeah, and he ranked second on the team in scoring with 5 goals, 4 assists, and 9 games played. So just right at a point per game so far. He had 21 points in 21 games last year, so right kind of on pace with what he did. I'd like to see maybe, by the end of the season to be a little bit above a point per game just so we see some progression there. But he's playing power play for them. He's on the penalty kill, has a shorthanded goal this season, so he's just kind of being used in all situations. And it's, again, we talk about organizational depth and having these different types of players. And, he reminds me, again, a lot of Tracy, a lot of Groulx, and, even Lundestrom to some extent, as well as guys that aren't outstanding in one area, but just really good depth pieces that you're comfortable throwing out in any situation. Again, like an Andrew Cogliano type player. Again, he's just one of those guys that will make his way to the NHL because he's so versatile. And, you don't have to worry about slotting him in a certain situation. He can get the job done. And that's the one thing I like about him. I think, it's going to take some time. He's going to have to play, out his full eligibility in the WHL, so that's 4 years. He's already done, I think this is his 3rd year, so one more after this, then to the AHL, probably for 1 or 2 years, and then we'll see him with the Ducks. But he'll be a nice piece at that point of their progression that he could slot into a third-line role, depending on who's here, or maybe on the 4th line, to start his NHL career and build up from there. So he definitely is a nice piece for the future that he could eventually slot into a competitive Ducks team.
Man, I think what we've decided now is that we need a Shagirl, Lundestrom, Groulx third line in the future. That to me sounds like heaven. All right, so let's move on to some of the NCAA guys. We're going to move now to someone who I'm actually a little sweet on just because of his style of play and, kind of the descriptors used about him. But he played last year for Chicago Steel, I believe, in the USHL, and that is Sam Colangelo.
Yeah, big fan of Sam Colangelo. Season got derailed a little bit with injuries and being a kind of bottom six player for Team USA at the World Junior Championships. But I don't like comparables, and we talked about how Shigurl is like Tracy and a few other guys. But if we're looking at similarities in the Ducks system, Sam Colangelo is a lot like Max Jones. Just big-bodied, NHL ready frame already. Colangelo's 6'3", I think just shy of 200 pounds, or I think he's 205, so he's over that now. But he's got a really good shot. Not, his speed isn't hurt by the size, and he's adjusted fairly well to the NCAA level after coming from a great program with the Chicago Steel. Only had 3 assists in 8 games last year, but again, like I said, a lot of that was due to injury and his role with the World Junior Championship. But he's got 2 goals and 2 assists in 8 games this year, and he's playing second-line right wing between a freshman center and a junior left winger, so it's a bit of a new-look line for them this year. But he's a guy I like a lot because he's going to be an NHL player no matter what, in my opinion. I think just his size coupled with his shooting ability, and his knack for getting in the right areas, he's going to be fairly similar to a Max Jones in that sense, where just goes to the net and has a stick on the ice and is in the right spots, could kind of work on a one-timer option on power play too, and just be a physical, kind of gritty, nasty player to play against. And you don't want Max Jones to be the only guy in your system who could do that, which is why I kind of like projections for Sam Colangelo and where he could fit potentially in the future. And talked about a Lundestrom, Shigurl, Grew line. It would be a tough line to play against, to have Max Jones on one wing and Sam Colangelo on the other side and have to go up against those guys.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I think that's the thing about Colangelo that I think makes him so exciting. I just remember, the year that we drafted him, he was the second round pick in the Drysdale draft. And one of the big things for him was just about he had a really good shot and a really good one-timer. And like you said, you honestly took the words right out of my mouth. Like, he's the kind of guy that maybe you hope can elevate like a second power play unit to being more than just these are the other 5 guys that we have. And I think we've seen over the years that power plays, look, 30% is a great job, which means 3 out of 10. Like, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Like, you have to be able to produce with that second unit, and having a guy like that who has that big body, also has that shot and those offensive instincts, like you said, like, I think it is very intriguing. And, like you said, he's a big kid. Like, I think you have him here in the notes at 6'3", 210. Like, that's a bowling ball, man. Like, I don't want to play against that guy. Like, that's, one of those guys that can get in on the forecheck and really bang bodies. And even if he never gets above, a bottom 6 type of player impact level, I think he is a type of player who can bring a meaningful dynamic and maybe provide a little bit of that scoring punch to the bottom of your forward group.
Yeah, man, I think his stock got hurt a little bit from the role he got handed for Team USA at that World Junior Championship. I mean, obviously all eyes were on Trevor Zegras, but for Colangelo to come in, and again, like, the parallels are there with Max Jones, because I remember when Max Jones was on that team and everybody was so hyped about him getting on the team and what he could do, and then the points didn't come. But Max Jones' role when he was on the World Junior Championship was to be a third-line checking energy guy and to drive the opposing team nuts. Sam Colangelo had the exact same role. Was not out there to put up points. Was not on a line with guys who could help him put up points. He was out there to be that physical power forward pest to play against. And his stock fell a little bit because of that, because you didn't notice him as much as you did some of the top guys, the Caulfields, the Turcottes, the Zegrases on that team, right? And I think we're starting to see what he can really do offensively this year with Northeastern. 4 points in 8 games isn't bad, and I think that will continue to pick up as he gets more accustomed to playing with the team. Like, this is only his 16th NCAA game. He's going to get more experience throughout the year, and he's a bit of a project. He's going to take some time at each level to adjust offensively to the flow of the game. But he's worth the wait because he just has the size and the shooting ability to excel at the NHL level. You just got to give him that time to adjust and get going and get comfortable.
Yeah, no, he's I think in a lot of ways he's kind of exactly what you're looking at for a second round pick, right? Like he's got a high enough floor that you feel confident using a high pick on him, but he's also got enough upside that it's a good risk to take with a second round pick. If he's the kind of guy that you don't expect to maybe be there in that fourth or fifth round, having him available to you and being able to grab him is very helpful. We're going to move now to Trevor Janicki, who I believe plays for the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah, would have been playing with Sasa Pastuov this year, but
Sucker.
he plays with Sasa Pastuov's brother, who still plays at Notre Dame, which is interesting. Doesn't play on a line with him, though. But, Trevor Janicki is a bit of an interesting player. Was a bit excited when they drafted him, but just hasn't taken to the NCAA level, really seen like a lot of progression since his freshman season. He had 13 points in 37 games in his first year, 10 points in 29 games last year. So really, lateral moves in terms of progression and putting up points, but used more as a third line checking center than anything over the last couple of years. Because Notre Dame year on year is a powerhouse in college hockey. They not a I guess a contending team every year, but a team that expects to compete. And he's got a lot of talented players in front of him. But this year he seems to have been given a little bit more freedom offensively and given an elevated role in the lineup. He's centering the second line between two junior forwards. So again, that entire line has now had 3 years of NCAA experience. So it's a really kind of veteran experienced line for them. And offensively, those three guys, Trevor Janicki, Max Ellis, and Soleg Bakic, yes, I love that name so much, but they're the top three scorers on the team for Notre Dame this year. And Janicki leads the team in goals, and he's second in points. He's got 4 goals and 2 assists in 7 games. So some early signs of progress for him this year. And, in terms of where he could project eventually in the future for the Ducks would be kind of a bottom 6 energy forward. Another one of those guys that, again, you just kind of like to have around. It's not a guarantee he'll be an NHL forward. Sam Carrick maybe type player again who could bounce in and out of the lineup, but just another kind of well-rounded depth piece that could either play center or wing at the NHL level.
Yeah. So wait, is his name Janicki?
Janicki. I don't know. Tomato.
Janicki. With his name, it's tomato. Okay, I know where the line is. All right, now I want to move on to our little Doug trio of Minnesota Golden Gophers. You have them kind of grouped together. Blake Mclaughlin, yeah, Jack Perbix, great name, and Jackson Lacombe. I saw that thing that I thought was interesting earlier as I was looking is Jack Perbix, similar to my beloved son Hunter Drew, is also listed as a right wing / defenseman.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually haven't watched enough of their games this year to know if he's playing on defense. I know last year he spent the majority of the season as a fourth line center, and for the few games that I've checked the lineup chart, he's been a fourth line center again for Minnesota. But I mean, there must be a reason he's listed as a right wing / defenseman. So I think at a few times they might have shifted him to third pairing defense to make way for some of the younger players that they have coming into the lineup. But yeah, I mean, of the three, he, and not in I don't want to say this in an offensive way, he's the least notable of the three in terms of projectable skills.
Wow. Disrespect.
I think there's a chance that he could make it to the NHL. It's a long journey, full term in the NCAA. So this year and next year, and then a few years in the AHL to get adjusted and develop there, and we'll see how things go for him. But he's taken some steps forward this year. He's got 4 assists in 7 games played. He had 9 points in 30 games last year, so some progression there, and that's what you hope to see as he gets more experience at the NCAA level. But the big two here are Blake Mclaughlin and Jackson Lacombe. And McLaughlin's in his final year of NCAA availability, so Gulls fans will see him next year, and I think he'll be a big addition to the Gulls lineup when he does get there, because he's a fairly talented offensive player. Doesn't always, the consistency I think is the big thing, because he can flash brilliance on a nightly basis and pull out a move that just you don't know where he got that from or that he even had that ability in his back pocket, but he's made progression year on year, which is something you like to see, especially at the NCAA level as well. And you expect to see that going from freshman to sophomore to junior, and now for a senior for Blake Mclaughlin. But he's leading the Minnesota Golden Gophers in scoring so far this year with 11 points in 8 games. Had 28 points in 31 games last year. So if he can finish the year above a point per game, be their leading scorer, contributing offensively and in all kind of areas of the game for this team, that's what you want to see from him next year as he moves up to the pro level and makes his debut either with the Gulls this year at the end of the college season, depending on how far they go, or at the beginning of next year. So he's one I'm keeping an eye on, because I want to. The Ducks obviously have to sign him first before he can make the jump over, but I would expect them to do so once his NCAA season is over. And then Jackson Lacombe is the one I think who maybe has the highest potential of all these guys. Former second round pick for the Ducks, in the same year where Braden Tracy got drafted as a late first round pick, and drafted out of high school, which has started kind of a trend. Each year the Ducks have seemed to draft, the last 3 years the Ducks have drafted a guy out of the high school circuit, and he made some great steps forward last year. Was one of the best defensemen for the Minnesota last year, one of the best young defensemen in the NCAA last year, and it's been a bit of a tough start this year. Only 2 assists in 8 games, but the 21 points he had in 27 games last year was a major step forward from the 13 in 37 he had in his freshman season. So I think at some point here, he's on a good team. He's still playing the same kind of second pair, top power play role that he played last year. Like, the points are going to come. So I'm not too worried about him yet at this point. But if this continues over, the next 8 or 9 or 10 games, I think there's some concern there that, the offensive production isn't coming for him.
And is his value to Anaheim, I guess, which is just gross, but here we are. Is it entirely centered on his ability to be a productive offensive player in a depth role?
Yeah, I would think so. I think he could be your second pairing or third pairing kind of offensive defenseman, if you want to call it that. He does have a bit more size to him than a Zellweger or a Drysdale do. And he is a very deceptive passer, and I think his passing ability is a bit underrated in terms of when we look at some of the prospects in the Ducks system right now. But yeah, I think that's what you would kind of expect him to be or hope he would be at that point. It's a tough journey to go from playing high school to playing the NCAA and 4 years of NCAA eligibility to go to the AHL and eventually make his way to the Ducks roster. So he's got a little bit of a ways to go in that journey, but if he could eventually slot in behind if Lindholm's still here and Drysdale and Zellweger and Thrawn be a guy like so that, he's a nice depth player to have that can contribute offensively in your lineup. And again, modern day NHL defenseman in terms of fluid skating, smooth skater, good first pass, can exit the zone cleanly, contribute to the play offensively. Like he has that ability in him.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because all 3 of those guys play in Minnesota together. It's kind of like a baby Michigan setup.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, go back and find that interview that Jason and I did with Blake Mclaughlin and Jack Perbix, because it was one of the best interviews we ever did. It was a lot of fun. Those guys were the best. They're good buddies too. They grew up together and played hockey in Minnesota together. So that's if you can dig back far enough and find that one, that's a good one.
That's awesome. I love that kind of stuff, man. That's just the little stupid stuff that just makes it all kind of fun. Next here, you have a young man playing for the University of Massachusetts by the name of Joshua Lapina. And I would just like to say that I think it's very cool that his last name means he's a werewolf. But yeah, no, what's up with young Joshua, who I believe was taken in this last draft, if I'm correct?
Yeah, was an overager taken in this draft. He's 20 already, so I think I don't know if he was a double overager when he was drafted or just a regular overager. But again, not his first go through at the draft, but. The reason he got drafted last year instead of the year prior is because he was playing for the University of Massachusetts. They were the NCAA champions last year. He was a big part of that, one of their top offensive players, and just kind of contributes in all areas for them. We've talked about a few players who do that, but mainstay on their penalty kill, top power play guy. He's centering their top line this year. He's got 5 points in 5 games. Had 23 points in 29 games last year as a freshman, in air quotes, because he was a bit older than a typical freshman. But either way, that's a fairly good first season, making the jump from, I think he was playing in the USHL, and to go into the NCAA and put up almost a point per game and win the NCAA championship in your first year. It's a pretty good season to have, and then get drafted by an NHL team. So it's nice to see, and he's one of those projects that eventually it could pay off. I think he was a 6th round pick by the Ducks, and to get a guy like that could potentially project as a decent bottom 6 center for your team, just again adds to the depth in this prospect pool. Not all these guys are gonna hit, Jack Perbix or Trevor Janicki or Sean Shigurl or Joshua Lapina. Only some of them are gonna hit, but the more of those types of players you bring in, the more chances you have at the lottery board or at the dartboard for one of them to hit and become that piece for your team in the future. And I think he has some projectable skills that he could get there. And even if it is just, a 4th line center for this team, I think he can, provide an impact in the future just with his kind of defensive ability and his knack for chipping in offensively.
Yeah, I think you can, I think it's something we've talked about. Like, you can always look at rosters and just see the guys that year performed over their heads and had an effect on the roster as a total, right? Noel Acciari had a great year in Boston before he went down to Florida. We talked about it before. Casey Zizekas might be the best bottom 6 center in the NHL. Even guys like Chris Wagner, right? Like, who we saw, after leaving Anaheim, he's found a nice home for himself as a 4th line center in Boston. He just plays a game that they like. He's a big kid. He's a good skater. And he's able to just kind of go around and bang bodies and not really give up too much. So I just think, like you're saying, like, having more than a few of those guys, right? Because, like, the natural inclination would be, let's just get as many goal-scoring wingers as we can, and hopefully 2 or 3 of them hit. But you can't do that. Like, you can't just, you can't build the whole plane out of goal-scoring wingers. So you need to take these later picks and use them on guys like Lapina or Janicki that can, fill those kind of depth forward roles. I am talking way too much for an episode that's just supposed to be.
No, but I do like those guys, and drafting these types of guys with later picks, in guys that are already so well-rounded. And again, they're not exceptional at any area of the game. Right. They're just fairly good at kind of all aspects of it, and maybe at some point something clicks for them in one area where they become they add that additional skill set to their arsenal, where they're a great forechecker or a great penalty killing forward, or the offense clicks, and then you're like, okay, well, we hit on this guy, right? And the more guys you draft like that are well rounded and have that ability to kind of play anywhere already, the better chance you have that one of them it's going to click for one of them in one area where they become more than just kind of a bottom 6 piece, and maybe they can jump up into your middle 6 and be a valuable player. And I don't know if Lapina's going to be that guy, but again, it's always nice to have those guys, and I'd rather them draft a guy like that in the 6th round than a guy who has a great shot but red flags everywhere else, right? I think.
Well, Yeah, the other I was going to say, right, the other version of that is also you don't want them to go out and sign Barclay Goodrow or Blake Coleman to these ridiculous deals that puts more pressure on them than they should, and creates negative value for actually effective and impactful players, right?
And it's a steady flow of these guys in, right? They're all going to make the NHL at different points in their career, and it allows some natural turnover.
They're all going to make the NHL.
Well, they all could.
It's very high on the Ducks prospect.
Potentially gives you some natural turnover where you don't have to hand out the big contract or go out into free agency and grab these guys. You've got some kind of natural churn of the roster that you could replace one of your guys that's looking for a bigger deal with another guy who can do the same thing and is still on the entry level contract or on a smaller deal right after the entry level. So you've got some options there.
So I want to get to a couple of guys real quick, but just based on the way that we're talking about this real quick, I just think this is a good time to mention it. I think it was Brett earlier in the Twitch chat made a point about, like, what do you do with all these guys? And I think, like we've said, the most important part to having this many guys is the ability for one of them to hit if three of them don't, right? When you only have one guy, he has to hit or you're sunk. When you have 5 or 6 of these guys, one of them can hit, and as long as one of them hits, it kind of erases the rest of it because you get 7 picks a year. And whether you're making trades, whether you're signing free agents, or you're just drafting guys, you're going to get that kind of natural overturn. There's always going to be undrafted free agents and things like that. But the other thing that I think is important to remember is these are all guys you can use in trades down the line, because as we're talking about them, they all fill different roles and they all have different styles of play. And all of those little factors to their game and their profile are going to make them attractive to different teams with different organizational philosophies, different needs, and things like that. And so when you can have a couple of these guys, like having a guy like Jackson Lacombe who maybe is supposed to be that top 4 defenseman, but maybe there's something they need and they can put him in that kind of deal. Well, they've still got, Henry Thrawn. They've still got Olin Zellweger. They've still got these guys that can help fill that gap. So I just thought that was something worth mentioning as we are kind of talking about how they have so many of these guys and why that's a plus. That plus provides a level of flexibility outside of, lineup flexibility. But I just mentioned someone that I think is an important one to get to. So these 2 guys you got here is Henry Thrawn and Ian Moore, and I believe they play together in the NCAA.
Yep, they both play for Harvard in the NCAA.
Oh, smart boys.
Yeah, and Henry Thrawn is one I've been waiting kind of all night here to talk about, because I think his path so far and his progress has been pretty underrated. Even when he got drafted, where he got drafted, I think was a lot lower than where he should have, and a lot of that was kind of on the team that he played for, like the historic, well, what will be and probably already is historic NTDP team with Zegras and Caulfield and Jack Hughes and Cam York and all those guys that were on that team, and how many of them went in the first round. Henry Thrawn had a pretty good season for them, but he wasn't the offensive defenseman for that team. He was the two-way kind of physical presence for that team, where he picked up some points and he had a pretty good offensive year, but he didn't have to use kind of the full depth of his offensive capabilities. And I think that made him fall a little bit further than he should have, and luckily he fell to the Ducks. And since then, all he's done is show that he is a lot better offensively than people gave him credit for. You look at his freshman season with Harvard, had 21 points in 31 games. For a defenseman, that's a great freshman season for a guy that isn't touted as a defenseman with the ability to put up points. Last year,
I mean, to your point, that's what Lacombe put up in his second year. So to see Thrawn get there in his first year is huge. Sorry, I just wanted to mention that.
No, you're exactly correct with that. And for Jackson Lacombe, like that, it was his calling card. Like, he was an offensive defenseman, and for Thrawn to come out and do that showed you what maybe a lot of people missed because of the team he played on. And then last year Harvard canceled their season because of COVID. Thrawn didn't play for a while, then decides in the second half of the year that he's going to go to the USHL, goes to play for Dubuque, puts up 22 points in 24 games, was one of the best defensemen in that entire league over that span, not just offensively but defensively as well. Just a great, well-rounded player, has some size and grit to his game as well. Likes to play on the edge, and then for him to go back to Harvard this year, and the way he started has just been unbelievable. He has 8 points in 2 games to start the year this year. He put up the first 5-assist game for Harvard since 2002. He was named the ECAC Hockey Player of the Week with those 8 points in 2 games. Just an amazing start. And Harvard's a great team. They got Matthew Coronato, who was a first-round pick last year for the Flames. They got Sean Farrell, who's a great prospect for the Montreal Canadiens as well. And then obviously Ian Moore, like you'd mentioned again, is a Ducks prospect on the back end. But they have a really talented team this year, and Henry Thrawn is going to be a major part of that. And man, again, you keep coming back to 8 points in 2 games is unbelievable. He's not going to keep up a 4 points per game pace over the year, but it is.
Connor McDavid of Harvard.
Yeah, I mean it's just an exceptional start, and again, he's top pairing, top power play, penalty kill guy for that team. He does everything, so he's going to be a big part of their success. And for me, I'm a lot higher than him on him than a lot of others are. He made my my top 10 for Ducks prospects when we put that out at the beginning of the year. I think he projects as a top 4 defenseman, and for me, a future pairing of Thrawn and Drysdale. I think they just complement each other so well, and allows you then, like we said, to shift Zellweger to the second pairing potentially in the future if all things go well. I just think everything that Thrawn brings reminds me a little bit of Lindholm in the sense, just a very reliable defenseman you can throw out there that does a little bit of everything. He's not going to put up 40, 50 points at the NHL level, but he's going to chip in for 20 or 30. He's got a great shot, so the goals are going to come. He could maybe slot in on your second power play depending on who you have there, and then to play him with a player like Drysdale, there's some responsibility that he shoulders that allows Drysdale to kind of have the freedom to be creative and do things offensively. So I just love that potential for him to be with a player like Drysdale, and Henry Thrawn is just kind of everything we could have hoped for, and where they ended up getting him.
Yeah, and I mean, think about this, that, you talked about having him being able to play with Drysdale and then move down Zellweger. Well, I mean, when we trade Ricard Raquel to Toronto for Braden Schneider at the deadline, there we go. That's our...
It's not bad.
Or is Braden Schneider
Braden
in New York?
Schneider's in New York, but it still applies.
Stupid. Whatever. Anyways, I feel so dumb now. Doesn't matter. So Henry Thrawn provides, actually, to something we talked about earlier. He provides a dynamic that maybe isn't necessarily the strength of this defense core right now, and that's incredibly exciting to see. The last guy I want to get to real quick, just because we have been running a little long, and I'm pretty sure it's Sunday morning for you now, is maybe the most fun prospect that I can think of coming through Anaheim in a while. I think Zegras should kind of be put a little bit on his own, as far as he was a lottery pick. He was somebody that they expected this kind of creativity and flair from. But Artyom Galimov has kind of become, I call him Giflamov online, because I just feel like every time I see him, he's got 5 seconds of magic, and then I never hear about him until he does it again. What is he like? Because every play I see, he looks like the second coming. And so I need you to explain to me what he realistically is and what Anaheim fans should kind of be looking at with him.
Yeah, I kind of in the same boat there with Artyom Galimov in terms of when you see him pop up on your feed, it's once or twice a month for just a ridiculously skillful play. He just has that ability to pull that out every now and then and just wow you. And be outside of that, he'll go on these stretches like he has recently where he's just pointless for 8 games and nothing happens. And then all of a sudden he's back and he's on the score sheet, and it's usually, a toe drag, top top shelf snipe or a spinorama pass to his teammate or put it between somebody's legs. Like, that just seems to be the case for him. And the way he started this year, I thought, okay, this is the year. This is his third full season in the KHL. He was a double overager when the Ducks drafted him.
That's what I was going to say. Like, he was in his last year of draft eligibility, right? When they took him, I think they took him in like the 6th round.
Yeah, they took him coming off a rookie season in the KHL. So he had made the jump from the MHL to the KHL. And he had 23 points in 55 games that year. So decent production.
Not bad.
You think of the KHL, again, is basically the second best league in the world. And it's very difficult to be a point per game player in that league, and then to make the jump over to the NHL. So decent production from him. Last year, about the same, 16 points in 41 games, playing kind of a third/second line role for the team. And then this year, he's been elevated to first line center on the team. First line center, first power play, even on the penalty kill a little bit. He's a very good shorthanded threat. And through the first 17 games, he had 10 points. And you're like, okay, maybe he's starting to figure it out, and he's going to be a lot closer to a point per game this year. And then right after that, like I said, pointless in 7 straight after that until he put up an assist in this last game. So he's sitting at 11 points in 25 games, which is still above, what he had put up last year slightly. So, there is some progress there, but you're looking now for the consistency from him. He's got this ability to break open a play every now and then, but he still goes missing for 5, 6, 7 games off the score sheet. And that's my concern with him at this point. But he is one of those players that, again, because of where he's playing and the contract status in the KHL, you can let him develop there for as long as you want. Mm-hmm. And eventually, whenever you think he's ready, if that ever comes, you can say, okay, like, we want to bring you over to North America. Let's see what you can do. And I like having that option. There's no timeline with him, right? Like, not with these NCAA guys in the sense that they've got 4 years. Then you got to decide if you want to sign them or not. They could sign for another team. And with the CHL, they've got 4 years or 3, depending on the case, and then it's to the AHL. And with Galimov, it's a bit of a different approach. You can say, okay, we'll just leave you in Russia. You're comfortable over there until we feel like you're ready to come over. And he's made some progression in other areas of his game. His face-off percentage this year went up from 48.9% to 52.6%. Again, it's small things to note, but for me, just looking for some consistency offensively. I love that he has that game-breaking ability to put you on the edge of your seat every now and then, but he needs to contribute offensively on a more consistent basis than just the flashy plays every now and then.
Yeah, and I just looked him up on Elite Prospects. It says he's like 5'11", 175, which means he's 5'10" and maybe 100 pounds. He sounds like someone, again, like, with some of the scoring inconsistencies, or just that, not inconsistency, but like, you're just going to go cold and it just happens. Like, he seems like someone that they could move to the wing to add a little bit more dynamic playmaking to a line. And, if he's able to come along, and he kind of does come over, like, again, it's one of those things where everybody hates comparables because you don't want to put that pressure, and all the ones that come to your head are, the best case examples, which is why they're there. But like, you think about Panarin, you think about Kaprizov, and these guys who come over a little bit older, and I think he's already probably closer in age to them than they were then. But you just see that there's this possibility to bring these kinds of players along. And like you said, his contract status and the way the KHL works, it creates an interesting opportunity for the team to just kind of let him sit over there and wait. And then either if his contract runs out, or they ready to pull him, like, okay, now we've got him. And I just think he's a really interesting thing. And if nothing else, 2 or 3 times a month, he's just the most fun player to watch for 10 seconds. And I just think that's really, really enjoyable. Even if he's never more than that, I just think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, he had, I think, like 2 or 3 goals of the month last year, a couple goals of the week, and then he had goal of the season. So, like, he had a knack for putting up those plays last year. I want to quickly address a question that Brett had. He said that any worry of any of these college players that they don't sign at the end of their eligibility. I would say no right now, but we never know, right? Like, it all depends when we get to that point and what the player feels like. I don't think the Predators would have ever said that Jimmy Vesey wouldn't have signed with them at the end of his eligibility. I think we would have said the same thing with Justin Schultz until he went to Edmonton. So you never know. I don't have any worries of that right now. But the player and the agent will look at, the depth in front of them and the journey that it's going to take them to get to where they want to be with that organization and figure out if that's the best fit. But I don't have any concerns for the Ducks with some of these guys, especially the top ones like Thrawn and Colangelo. I think we should be fine, at least with the top end of our NCAA talent, that they'll make their way to the Gulls and eventually to the Ducks. So no concerns with that one. Wanted to briefly mention Ian Moore because we skipped over him. It's his freshman season with Harvard. He's got assist in 2 games so far. Also played with Chicago Steel last year. We had a pretty decent season, 24 points in 45 games. So he'll be a fun one to watch. Continue the trend of drafting guys out of high school. Jackson Lacombe, then Ian Moore, and then the next guy we're going to talk about here in Kyle Kukkonen was drafted out of the Minnesota high school circuit last year, putting up some. I always love watching the high school numbers because it's just absurd numbers, like 100 points in 40 games or something like that. So he got drafted out of there. He's playing in the USHL this year, centering the third line for that team. He's got 10 points in 11 games, which is 6th in team scoring. So he's doing pretty good and he's playing for the Madison Capitals. So a pretty good potential project for the Ducks. That's how all of these kind of high school guys project out. I think a lot of people have got cold feet after the Casey Middlestat debacle, where the Sabres took him ridiculously high, and that just has not panned out for him. But for where the Ducks took him, he's kind of a nice project. He's a creative playmaker. He's made the jump to the USHL where he's almost at a point per game. So he's kind of a fun one to keep progress on. And then his commitment in the NCAA is to Michigan Tech, which is a weird one. So that will be interesting to see if he actually goes through with that.
That's awesome. I didn't even know Michigan had a Tech. This is great.
I didn't know either.
It's like when you find out Florida has like 85 colleges that all have Division I football teams. Oh,
well, it's just it's weird for NCAA hockey, even anyway, right? Because it's Michigan, and like they're the powerhouse right now with like all the top ranked talent going to Michigan, and even you've got Michigan State as well, who's always a good team. And then all of a sudden, I see he's committed to Michigan Tech. It's like, all right, you do you. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, look, I applaud it, and to the point, I think you said it was Brett brought up about the college thing, and you made a great point about they'll look at the road ahead of him. Right now, I mean, look, the one thing, as much as it's never been a destination, at the end of the day, there are a lot worse places to be 23 and making $100,000 a year than Orange County. So I think that's always going to be enticing. I think having really good young players like Zegras, like Drysdale, like Mctavish, these guys that you can look at, Terry, and go, I see the direction forward for that team, is always a positive. The other thing to mention is the rest of the roster still has to be filled out. And there is going to be spots available for a lot of these guys. And if they do come out of college and do feel they're ready to make an honest push, then a team like Anaheim, which needs to find guys sooner rather than later, you've got the whole rookie contract thing and then the second deal, and we're seeing the way second deals work now. And if everything goes right, then Anaheim now has 2 second deal guys that are going to be a problem as far as like cap and things like that. So, I think, like you said, there hasn't been any of that. I think Lambert mentioned it on the most recent episode of Puck Soup that, like, it felt inevitable with Adam Fox. Like, everybody knew he was going to end up a Ranger. So I just think, there's a lot to be excited about. I don't know how you feel, Eddie, but I had a lot of fun doing this and kind of getting to learn more about some of these guys. Obviously, as everybody can see from behind me, I'm a rink rat. I spend a lot of time in old barns watching the kids, but you can't be everywhere at once. Nobody can. So, yeah, I mean, Is there anything else you wanted to add before we shut this
No,
down?
I would say moving forward, this one was obviously a little long compared to our normal shows.
They're gonna all be 3 hours. Shut up. It's gonna be awesome.
More so moving forward, since this was the first one, and we also wanted to give you a bit of a background on each of these guys and where they project for the Ducks and moving forward. The future of these prospect update shows will be more so kind of updating you on the last month of progress and how they're doing this season. So this was a bit of that, obviously, to see how they've started the year, but also kind of in depth into where we think they'll project into the roster and kind of where their career has gone up until this point. So a little shorter episodes when we do these moving forward, but it was nice to dive into it because the Ducks have one of the best prospect pools in the league, and we've had a great fun start to the beginning of this year. We'll hope that lasts and the Ducks continue to play a fun style. But outside of Zegras and Drysdale and even Mctavish, the future of the Ducks are these guys that we're talking about right now. Guys playing in the CHL, guys playing in the NCAA, guys playing overseas. And, it's nice to see a lot of them like Pastuov and Thrawn and others that have started so well and are key players, not even just for their teams, but some of the top players in their leagues right now. And that's what you hope for when you're in the middle of a rebuild, that the players that you do take, and especially the first, second, and third round picks, are playing well and developing and progressing forward. So it was nice to dive into it. I mean, we missed two guys in Albin Sundquist and Ethan Bowen, but not too much to really update you on there both.
Yeah, no, we'll get to them. Like you said, this was a little different. Obviously we had the first 2.5 hours of this episode where we had to talk about Jack Eichel.
Of course, as we do.
Yeah, it is what it is. We got to keep it consistent. But again, just thank you everybody who came out. It's a random Thursday night. I know it's late for Eddy, so I appreciate Eddy being able to do this at this point, and all of you guys for coming out and asking questions in the chat. We tried to get to some of the ones that we felt we could kind of fit in, but like Eddy said, going forward, these aren't going to be 2-hour marathons unless they keep letting us do them by ourselves, in which case they all will be. But the updates will get a little bit shorter when we start to get an idea of who these guys are and things like that. But this is something that I think me and Eddy are looking forward to doing at least once a month, and to just try to get everybody updated on what's going on. So with that, I will say that we will obviously have the weekend show coming up this weekend. I don't know that we've figured out exactly when that's going to be. We have to figure out when Pat isn't available so we can schedule it exactly for that moment.
Pat should be back this weekend, hopefully.
We don't know that. He's on injured reserve. We need the cap space. It's fine. But again, thank you guys all for coming out. I hope everybody has a great Thursday night. Eddy, have a wonderful Monday morning. And we'll see you guys all later. Thank you so much.
See you guys.